The museum was silent in the way ancient deserts are silent, heavy, unmoving, holding secrets older than language. Dr. Ion Remen stepped through the long corridor with slow, almost reverent steps, the echo of his shoes swallowed by the dark. Beyond the glass cases and shadowed skeletons, a soft golden nightlight washed over the exhibits like a memory that refused to fade. Outside, the city slept. Inside, millions of years were awake. Ion paused before the oldest skull in the museum, its brow low, its face flat, its presence strangely dignified. Sahelanthropus sadensia, a being that lived more than 6 million years ago. Its quiet bones seemed to watch him, not with eyes, but with patience and invitation to listen. He lifted his hand, hovering inches from the glass. "This," he whispered, "is where it began," and the world around him slowly melted away. The museum dissolved into a warm African forest where sunlight leaked through leaves like liquid gold. The air shimmered with heat and insects, and the smell of damp soil rose from the ground. Ion's breath steadied, his heartbeat slowing as if syncing with the ancient rhythm of the earth. There, moving carefully between the tangled roots and ferns, was a small creature, part ape, part something new. Its arms were long, its face gentle, its body built for climbing. But then, without warning, it did something extraordinary. Its knuckles lifted off the ground, its back straightened, its legs carried its weight for a moment that seemed impossibly fragile. It stood, not fully, not gracefully, but enough to change everything. Ion felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. The first uncertain step of a being that didn't know it was beginning a story, a step that would, in time, lead to art, fire, cities, and the very museum Ion worked in. A rustle echoed across the forest, and the small creature dropped back on all fours, heart pounding. Predators lurked everywhere in this world. Saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, crocodiles that slipped silently through murky water. Survival was a prayer whispered without words. But that brief moment upright, Ion saw it as clearly as breath on glass was, the spark of a future that would take millions of years to ignite. The forest darkened, the scene shifting like a dream. Time moved, slow but unstoppable, bringing new landscapes and new beings. The trees thinned. The grasslands stretched outward under a blazing sun. Herds of antelope ran like rivers of muscle and dust. And in the middle of this endless savanna walked a group unlike the last. Australopithecus, smaller than modern humans, but walking confidently on 2 legs, their arms swinging gently at their sides. They gathered berries, dug up roots, scanned the horizon for lions. The adults kept the young close, forming loose circles of protection. Ion watched them like a guardian from another world. One young female stumbled as she walked. A stone cut her foot. She whimpered softly. Instinct could have driven the group forward. Without her they were prey, and prey must move quickly. But one of the older females slowed, reached out, and helped her balance. It was such a simple gesture. But in a world where survival was measured in seconds, compassion held meaning beyond understanding. Ion felt something tighten inside his chest. This was the first flicker of what would one day become love, empathy, community. The first human emotion was not fear or hunger, it was care. Storm clouds gathered in the distance, the sky turned purple. Lightning struck somewhere far away, and the ground trembled faintly. The group moved quickly, seeking shelter. The wind howled, kicking dust into their eyes. A sudden roar echoed across the plain, a lion, golden and enormous, prowling toward them with lethal grace. The adults shrieked warnings, pushing the young to run. The lion charged, and then everything held its breath. One male Australopithecus, smaller than any modern man, not strong enough to fight a predator like this, did something unthinkable. He turned toward the lion instead of running away. He stomped the ground, raised his arms, screamed with a courage he did not know he possessed. The lion slowed, confused, startled by the sudden defiance. The others escaped. The male backed away slowly, trembling, heart thundering in his chest. But he held the lion's gaze long enough for his family to get to safety. Only then did he turn and flee, disappearing into a cluster of tall grass, alive by mere seconds. Ion inhaled sharply. "You brave soul," he whispered. "You didn't even know what bravery was." The storm passed, the sun rose, and the cycle of life continued. Grass grew, rivers shifted, volcanoes erupted and cooled. The earth changed its shape one slow breath at a time. The world blurred again, time accelerating, landscapes bending and reshaping themselves as if under the brush of a cosmic painter. The museum floor beneath Ion's feet returned, faintly shimmering. His reflection appeared in the glasses, modern features layered over the ancient skull beyond it. 2 worlds, 2 faces, 1 story. But the story wasn't finished. Something else tugged at him, like a whisper through the halls. He turned and walked deeper into the museum. The lights flickered as if sensing his passage. Fossils lined the walls, jawbones of early hominins, fragments of femurs, casts of ancient footprints preserved in dry volcanic mud. Each artifact hummed softly with meaning. Ion stopped near a display showing a set of footprints from literally 3 early humans who had walked across wet ash nearly 4 million years ago. 2 adults, 1 child between them, sometimes stepping inside their tracks, sometimes trailing behind. He imagined that moment, the ash still warm beneath their feet, the sun rising behind them, the air filled with the scent of distant rain. The adults walking slowly, watching for predators, the child tagging along, trying to match their pace. That small family had no idea their footprints would outlast their entire species. No idea that for a million years in the future, a man would stand in a quiet museum and feel strangely connected to them. Ion placed his hand on the glass, whispering, "You carried the future in your footsteps." The guard's voice emerged from somewhere behind him. "You're here late again, Dr. Remen." Ion didn't turn. "I can't help it. They feel alive tonight. Every night." The guard chuckled softly. "You talk to them more than anyone else." Ion smiled faintly. "They're the reason we exist. They deserve someone to listen." The guard leaned against the doorway, folding his arms. "So what comes next in the story?" After those little ones who walked in the ash, Ion's eyes softened. Everything changes. The earth reshapes itself. The climate shifts, and a new kind of ancestor is forced to choose cling to the old world, or adapt to a new one. He stepped back, letting the quiet settle again. But inside his mind, the world of the past opened like a door. New figures emerged from the shadows of time, their forms sharper, their movements more deliberate. Ion whispered, not to the guard, but to the ancient beings only he could see. "This is where they stand tall. This is where intelligence begins." The guard didn't understand the depth of what Ion was seeing, but he recognized the tone of awe in his voice. "You're lost in time again," the guard murmured. Ion nodded. "Because time is telling a story, and I'm just following its footsteps." The lights over the exhibit dimmed slightly, almost as if the museum were breathing. Ion turned his attention toward the next room where the first stone tools waited, the next chapter of humanity's awakening. But before he left, he glanced one last time at the earliest ancestors, the ones who dared to stand, who dared to care, who dared to face lions for the sake of their children. In their fragile bones, Ion saw not weakness, but a quiet, unstoppable strength. He walked forward, the distant hum of ancient winds growing louder in his ears, as though millions of years were calling him deeper. The first footsteps into time had been taken. The next footsteps, those of minds learning to shape the world, were waiting in the shadows ahead. The museum felt different when Ion stepped into the next hall, as though the air itself had thickened with meaning. The soft lights illuminated a new set of artifacts: rough stones, chipped edges, hand axes shaped by fingers long turned to dust. These were not bones. These were choices. These were intentions. These were the first whispers of a mind awakening. Ion stood before a simple stone tool, no larger than his palm. It was sharp on one end, broad on the other, its edges shaped by countless deliberate strikes. It was primitive, but it was a miracle. Ion brushed a finger along the glass and felt the echo of the hands that had held it more than 2 million years ago. Slowly, the museum's walls dissolved again, and the cold, still air transformed into the warm breeze of an African morning. The sense of dust, crushed grass, and distant water drifted around him. A small group of early humans, Homo habilis, moved across the landscape, their gait neither fully human nor fully ape, but something in between. Something becoming. A young male crouched beside a fallen branch, curiosity flickering in his dark eyes. He held a stone and struck it against another, the sound sharp and metallic. At first, nothing. Then a shard broke away, thin, sharp, dangerous. He lifted it, turning it slowly in his fingers. He didn't smile, his kind didn't know how to smile yet, but there was something like wonder in the way he examined the tool. He tested it on a piece of bark, slicing through it with surprising ease. A quiet sound rumbled from his chest, halfway between breath and satisfaction. He had unlocked a door his ancestors had never known existed. Nearby, a female watched him, her hunger gnawing. Food was scarce. Scavenging from carcasses left by lions and hyenas was a dangerous game. Speed mattered. Sharpness mattered. This simple blade would mean the difference between eating and starving. Ion watched as the young male ran toward a carcass of zebra slain hours earlier by predators, now resting in the shade. Vultures circled overhead, The air hummed with tension, but with the stone blade in hand, he worked quickly, cutting strips of meat before other scavengers could claim them. His group gathered around him, eating desperately. For these early humans, every meal was a stolen gift. Ion felt a tear slip down his cheek. This was survival shaped by thought. A soft footstep sounded behind him. The night guard from the museum, quiet, observant, had somehow entered the vision without Ion noticing. Or perhaps Ion's mind was split now, half in the museum, half in the past. "What are you seeing now?" the guard asked. Ion kept his eyes on the ancient world. The moment when hands became extensions of the mind, when stone became memory, when each strike carried knowledge forward. The guard stepped beside him in silent wonder as the scene continued. Time flowed like water, shifting the world once more. Mountains eroded, rivers changed course, forests became grasslands. New beings emerged, taller, stronger, more efficient. Homo erectus. Ion found himself standing at the edge of a vast plain where these early humans walked upright with a confidence absent in their ancestors. Their bodies were leaner, colder resistant. Their strides were longer, their eyes more alert. A group approached a rocky outcrop where river stones were scattered. One male, broad-shouldered, determined, selected a rounded stone and struck it with another, shaping a hand axe with deliberate precision. Each blow was exact, practiced, almost rhythmic. He wasn't guessing. He was remembering. He was repeating a pattern learned from another who had learned it from another, back through generations. Ion exhaled slowly. They were teaching. They were passing knowledge. This was the first classroom on Earth. The guard whispered, "No books, no chalk, just stone." "Stone," Ion said, "and the determination to survive." The male finished the hand axe and tested it against the bark of a tree. Sharp, strong, a tool that could cut, scrape, dig, crack open bones for the rich marrow inside marrow that would nourish the growing brains of his people. Suddenly, a rustle came from the tall grass. The group stiffened. A herd of gazelles raced across the plain, hooves drumming the earth. But behind them, almost silent, moved a predator, sleek, muscular, deadly, a cheetah. The humans scrambled for higher ground, but the predator wasn't after them. It lunged for the smallest gazelle, bringing it down in a burst of dust and blood. The humans watched carefully from a distance. They knew their place in the ecosystem. They were not yet apex hunters. They were opportunists. When the cheetah dragged the carcass away, the humans waited. Minutes passed. Vultures landed. Then, when the cheetah returned to feed, the humans made their move. They surrounded the predator, waving their arms, shouting harsh, raw cries. The cheetah hissed, uncertain. There were too many of them. Reluctantly, it backed away, and the humans feasted. Not because they were strongest, but because they were cleverest, Ion whispered. They had begun to negotiate with the world. The scene shifted again, this time to night. A fire crackled in the center of a small camp, flames licking the air with orange tongues. The early humans sat around it, eyes wide, mesmerized. Fire was both enemy and allied, dangerous, unpredictable, powerful. But now, under the glow of the flames, something extraordinary was happening. A child reached toward the fire, frightened at first. The older female placed a hand on the child's shoulder, pulling him gently back, teaching him caution without words. Sparks floated upward like glowing insects, disappearing into the night. The fire provided warmth, protection, light, but it also became something more, something profound. It became a place where thoughts could slow, where minds could wander, where ideas could simmer. Under the night sky, their shadows danced on the rocks behind them, and for the first time in human history, the darkness was not absolute. Ion lost himself in the scene. He watched the flames flicker, watched the humans stare into them as though seeing the future. Fire, he murmured, is the first storyteller. Its light kept them awake longer, allowed them to imagine, to remember. Around a fire, humanity dreamed. The guard, still standing beside him, nodded slowly. "It feels sacred." "It is," Ion said, "because everything we became began in its glow." He watched as the early humans dozed near the fire, their bodies huddled close for warmth. The night was cold, and predators lurked in the dark, but the crackling flames formed a protective circle. They had carved out a piece of safety in a world that offered none. Time passed, years, then thousands of years, then hundreds of thousands. Humans migrated from Africa, following coastlines, rivers, and valleys. The world changed as they moved. Ice spread across continents. Seas rose and fell, forests appeared and vanished. Yet humans kept walking. They crossed deserts, climbed mountains, braved harsh winters. Curiosity and survival pushed them forward, always forward. Ion felt the weight of those migrations like a pressure on his chest. They carried the future with their feet, he said softly. Every step was a promise. The guard looked puzzled. A promise that humanity would not stay still, Ion replied. A promise that we would explore, adapt, learn. A promise that we would not let extinction take us quietly. The ancient world faded slowly, melting once again into the museum's quiet glow. Ion found himself back in the hall of stone tools. The silence felt different now, fuller, deeper, like the echo of millions of footsteps lingering in the air. He looked at the artifacts with new eyes. These stones were not just tools. They were the first memories shaped by human hands. The first knowledge passed down. The first technology. The first symbols of foresight and planning. Ion whispered. This was the moment humanity woke up. He stepped back from the display and walked slowly toward the next exhibit room, the Hall of Early Humans who braved the brutal Ice Age, who carved their stories into bone and stone, who faced cold and hunger and predation with courage beyond measure. Behind him, the guard spoke softly. You look like you're walking into another world. Ion stopped at the threshold and answered without turning around. I am. He took a deep breath. The air smelled faintly of dust and history. In the dim light ahead, the silhouettes of Ice Age humans awaited him, powerful, compassionate, resilient. Now Ion said quietly, the world grows colder, harder, and humanity must find warmth inside themselves. He stepped forward into the next chapter of time. The room ahead of Ion felt colder than the others. Not a chill from the museum's air system, but a cold that seemed to seep from the bones of the past itself. As he walked forward, his footsteps echoed softly, like distant pulses in a frozen world. Shadows stretched across the display spear points, hide cloaks, casts of ancient footprints left in snow long melted. Ion placed his hand on the glass case holding a primitive wooden spear, its tip hardened by fire and time. The museum lights shimmered, and once again, the world dissolved around him. Wind howled, snow fell in thick sheets, drifting across a vast, pale landscape. The sun was a weak, distant glow, barely cutting through the icy sky. The cold wasn't merely temperature, it was presence, weight, something that pressed itself against the skin and bone. A small band of humans trudged forward, their breaths steaming in the air. These were archaic humans, strong, thick-boned, resilient. Their fur-lined cloaks were wrapped tightly around them, and their faces were hardened by seasons of hunger and storms. Their world was one of survival woven into every hour. Ion sensed not just their cold, but their exhaustion. They were searching for food, for shelter, for anything that life would offer them in this frozen era. Every step felt heavy, deliberate. No step was taken without cost. The tall male at the front lifted his hand, signaling the others to stop. He crouched, brushing snow aside to reveal the faint tracks of an animal, something large, something promising. He touched the tracks gently, as though listening to them. Ion felt admiration rise within him. These humans had no written language, no maps, no weather forecasts. And yet they understood the world more intimately than any scientist. They could read the earth the way modern humans read books. The group followed the tracks toward a forest of ice-draped pines. The wind moaned through the branches, sounding almost like distant voices. The cold deepened as they entered the trees. Snow cracked beneath their feet. A faint movement caught their attention. A young girl in the group tugged at her mother's hand, pointing toward a clearing. There, nibbling at the frozen bark of a birch tree, stood a reindeer, thin, weak, but alive. The humans exchanged looks, silent communication honed through generations. The tall male raised his spear, signaling for the hunt. Ion's breath caught. The tension felt alive. The group spread out slowly, carefully, surrounding the animal. It looked up suddenly, ears twitching, sensing danger. Before it could flee, the tall male lunged forward, his spear slicing through the air. The reindeer tried to run, but another hunter blocked its path. A final, precise strike brought it down. The humans fell to their knees, not cheering, not celebrating, but exhaling with the relief of survival. The young girl approached the fallen animal, placing a hand on its fur. She didn't fully understand death, not yet, but she felt its heaviness. Her mother gently pulled her away. They skinned the reindeer quickly, their fingers moving with practiced speed. Hunger sharpened every motion. The smell of warm blood steaming in the icy air mingled with a faint scent of pine. The group ate raw pieces of liver to regain strength before carrying the rest back to their shelter. Ion followed them across the snow, feeling as though the wind were pushing against him too. Their shelter lay inside a cave carved into a cliffside, stalactites like frozen teeth hanging from its ceiling. Inside, Firelight flickered soft, golden, impossibly precious in the cold. The warmth spread slowly into Ion's bones, though he wasn't truly there. The humans settled around the fire, sharing the meat. A baby cried softly, and the mother cradled him close, humming in a voice that had no words but carried comfort all the same. Their shadows danced along the cave walls like ancestral spirits. Beside the fire sat a figure with a broader frame, heavier brow, and features distinct from the others. A Neanderthal. Ion felt his breath catch. There was no violence here, no conflict, only coexistence. The Neanderthal elder sat quietly, sharpening a stone scraper. His movements were steady, almost gentle. He passed the tool to a young human boy sitting beside him, guiding the child's hands. The child mimicked the motions with awe. It was a moment of teaching, of shared skill. Look at them, Ion whispered softly. They weren't enemies, they were neighbors. They learned from each other. The guard's voice appeared in the vision, distant but warm. They worked together. Ion nodded. More than we realized. They shared tools, shared knowledge, even shared blood. The fire crackled loudly, sparks jumping into the air like fleeing fireflies. Someone tossed more logs onto the flames. The warmth pulsed outward. Outside the cave, the wind roared, carrying the sound of shifting ice. An avalanche rumbled far away. The world was transforming. The glaciers moved like sleeping giants, reshaping mountains and rivers. Inside the cave, the humans huddled closer, leaning into the fire, leaning into one another. Night deepened. The Neanderthal elder reached down, picking up a piece of burned wood and tracing lines on the cave floor. Ion watched, mesmerized. Crude shapes formed animals' tracks. Humans. The others gathered around, their breaths catching in soft murmurs. This wasn't just drawing. This was memory. This was teaching. This was the beginning of something that would eventually lead to symbols, writing, knowledge. The elder finished, placing the charcoal down as though it was sacred. He closed his eyes and exhaled. The group understood these markings were not meant to be stepped on. They were meant to be honored. A young boy touched the drawing gently, his small fingers trembling with awe. The firelight reflected in his eyes, making them appear filled with stars. Ion felt something tighten in his chest. A single thought settled over him like snow. We learned to dream in the darkness. The scene shifted again, pulling Ion deeper into time. He found himself at the mouth of the cave at dawn. The sky glowed pale orange, the cold wind brushing against the cliffside. A young Neanderthal woman stood outside, watching the sunrise. Her breath turned to mist before her. She pressed a hand against her chest, eyes closed. It looked like prayer. Maybe not prayer as we understand it, but gratitude, awareness, connection to something larger than herself. She bent down, touching the snow with an expression of respect and sorrow. A small figure lay beside her, a child, wrapped in hide, lifeless. The cold had taken him during the night. A burial was prepared. The humans and Neanderthals stood together, creating a shallow pit in the frozen ground. They placed flowers, frozen violets, brittle and pale around the child's body. The mother wept without sound, her face twisted in grief. Another woman held her tightly, sharing her pain. Ion felt tears sliding down his own face. These people, often painted as savages in old history books, were capable of profound love, profound mourning. They buried their dead with care, with ceremony, with meaning. They carried their hearts with them. Ion whispered. Snow began to fall as they finished the burial, the flakes drifting gently over the mound. The group stood silently for a long moment, heads bowed. Then, slowly, they returned to the cave. The world continued. Seasons passed. Years flowed into centuries. The glaciers advanced and retreated. Herds migrated. Rivers carved new paths. Humans, archaic humans, Neanderthals, and early Homo sapiens crossed paths, shared fires, shared knowledge, shared life. Eventually, the Neanderthals disappeared not in violence, but in silence, a slow fading, a merging, a story without witnesses. Ion stood alone in the snowy world, watching the last Neanderthal man walk into a forest heavy with snow, his figure fading into white. For a moment he looked back, as though sensing the gaze of the future. Then he disappeared, and the Ice Age world dissolved. Ion blinked, finding himself once again in the museum hall. The air was warm again, the silence deep. His heart felt heavy but full. The guard approached slowly. You okay? Ion nodded, though his voice trembled a little. They lived, they loved, they fought the cold not just with fire, but with each other. The guard gave a small smile. Chapter 3, in your head. In my heart, Ion replied softly. He turned toward the next darkened hole, the beginning of modern humans, the awakening of imagination, the birth of art, myth, music. The mind begins to dream now, Ion whispered, and he stepped forward into the next dawn of humanity. Night draped itself across the museum like a velvet curtain as Dr. Ion Remen moved deeper into the hall, his steps echoing softly against the polished floor. The lights dimmed further the moment he entered the Human Origins Gallery, as if the building itself sensed he had reached the threshold of the most delicate chapter in the story of humanity. This was the section dedicated to Homo sapiens, the only surviving human species, the ones who would learn not only to survive but to wonder, to question, to imagine, to dream. Ion paused before a display made of glass and shadow, three ancient silhouettes painted onto a cave wall replica, their hands frozen mid-motion, their torches long extinguished thousands of years ago. The lights above flickered, and once more the air grew heavy, warm, and earthy. He knew he was being pulled into the past, again subtle at first, then completely, as if the museum floor dissolved under his shoes and replaced itself with cold limestone. He found himself in the smoky glow of a cave, lit by flickering firelight. A group of early Homo sapiens and atomically modern humans sat gathered around a fire built inside a hollow deep within a cliff. Their hair was long, their faces painted with ochre and charcoal, their breath warm in the frigid air. On the walls, animals galloped in red and black pigment, mammoths, bison, wild horses, creatures they depended on yet also revered. One woman, no older than 20, stood at the wall with a small bowl of pigment. She was grinding charcoal with animal fat. The fire behind her danced, casting shifting shadows over her features. She pressed her palm to the wall, then blew pigment across her fingers, leaving behind a perfect hand stenciled her signature, her declaration that she existed. She stepped back and touched the handprint lovingly, almost reverently. It was a moment of pure humanity, fragile and yet eternal. Ion felt something twist inside him. These were not prehistoric beings. They were people just as real and warm and complicated as anyone alive today. Behind the artist, a man knelt beside a child, drawing lines on the ground with a stick. He was teaching the child to communicate, not just with gestures but with symbols. The child repeated the lines, smiling widely when his father nodded in approval. Language was being born, not merely sound, but meaning. Not merely communication, but memory. A gust of cold wind blew into the cave. The people moved closer to the fire. One of the elders began to drum softly on a stretched hide, slow and rhythmic. Others joined, soft humming, gentle chanting, a melody of voices carried by flames. Their music wasn't entertainment, it was connection, it was identity. It was how they kept their world stitched together through nights of hunger, cold, and fear. Ion closed his eyes, allowing the sound to wash over him. A voice spoke beside him, soft, familiar, and startling. You see it now, don't you? It was the museum guard, except not the guard. His clothing was made of fur, his face streaked with ochre, yet his eyes were unmistakably the same kind, warm and watchful. Ion whispered, "They're so much like us. They are us," the guard replied. "This is where the mind awakens not only to survive, but to create." In the firelight, young men and women carved bone needles, stitched animal skins, and shaped delicate tools far more refined than anything their ancestors had made. They crafted beads, necklaces, ornaments, objects, with no survival purpose except one, beauty. They made burial rites for their dead, placed flowers beside bodies, left tools and food for the journey beyond. They believed in something more than what they could see. That belief made them dangerous and magnificent. A sudden shout echoed from the cave entrance. A hunter burst inside, breathless, snow clinging to his hair. Everyone stood. His eyes carried terror. He pantomimed enormous antlers with his hands and pointed toward the plains below the cliff. A mammoth herd too close. The tribe hurried to gather their weapons, wooden spears tipped with fire-hardened tips, sharp stone blades, slings. But even as they prepared, Ion felt the tension in the air change. A decision was forming, a new idea. One of the hunters dipped a spear in animal fat, lit the tip in the fire, and pointed to the cave painting of mammoths. He gestured, drawing a pattern in the air. Surround them. Scare them, drive them off, not kill, but survive another day without needless risk. The others nodded. Strategy, planning, abstract thinking. They were communicating danger and tactics through art. Ion felt his heart swell. This was humanity's turning point. Not physical strength, not sharper teeth, not thicker fur. Mind, creativity, the ability to imagine something that did not yet exist. The hunters left silently. The cave fell into quiet, save for the crackle of fire. Ion turned back to the artist. She stood in front of her newest painting, this one showing not animals, but people, figures with raised hands, a circle of hunters arranged around a mammoth. She was drawing the future. She was drawing intention. The guard figure stood beside Ion. This is when humans transcended instinct, when they learned not just to react, but to dream. Ion nodded slowly. This is when the world began to change. And it would change forever, the guard replied. Because imagination is a dangerous thing. And a beautiful one. The scene began to dissolve again. Edges softening, colors fading as though the cave itself were drifting away. The fire dimmed, then winked out. The cave walls dissolved into the smooth glass of the museum display. The cold air of prehistory gave way to the sterile, climate-controlled atmosphere of the gallery. Ion blinked, adjusting to the present. The museum was quiet again. The cave was gone, but its warmth lingered inside his chest. He stared at the handprints on the replica wall-wide silhouettes against dark stone. Suddenly he understood something profound. Those hands weren't trying to leave a mark on the cave. They were trying to reach across time. To him, to everyone. Imagination, Ion murmured, was the spark that made us human. The guard, now fully in his modern uniform, again stood a few feet away, leaning casually against a railing. He gave Ion a knowing smile. They dreamed, he said, and because they dreamed, you exist. Ion felt the truth of those words settle deep inside him.